Good evening and welcome to Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity's webinar, Beyond Indigenous Peoples Day, Decolonization and Social Justice. I'm your host, Petra Galland. My pronouns are her and she, and I'm the Community Outreach Specialist for the Office of Human Rights and Equity. And if you're not familiar with our office, we are constantly striving to promote and protect human rights and eradicate discrimination. And we are constantly working on supporting this community's efforts to a better place to live with human rights and equity and social justice movements with trainings and webinars, and of course, discrimination cases and claims. So I'm excited tonight. Joining me tonight is going to be our guest, Becky Cruz Lizama, a senior tribal liaison with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA. The Office of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs, we'll be saying OLEA. Becky is a senior tribal liaison with with NOAA, Office of OLEA. She began working with NOAA OLEA in 2015 as a congressional affairs specialist. She's previously served as one of the co-chairs for NOAA's Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Employee Resource Group, a member of the NOAA Core Values Working Group, a member of NOAA's Diversity Inclusion Management Advisory Council, and a member of the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations DEI&A Working Group. She's a member of the Department of Commerce Asian American and Pacific Islander AAPI Employee Resource Group and NOAA's AAPI ERG. Moreover, Becky's assisted with the White House Initiative on Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders, also known as, this is the best acronym ever, it is 9 letters, it's HUIANFI. Since March of 2021, she's been with HUIANFI and undertook a detail with HUIANFI from May through October of 2022. She's currently a member of the Department of HUIANFI's implementation team and spearheaded by the Deputy Secretary's Office. Whew, a mouthful, amazing experience, and she's really bringing the receipts to the table. Please join me in welcoming Becky Cruz Lizama. Hello, Becky. How are you?
Well, I should unmute myself and say Hafade. Good evening, everybody. So, Becky Cruz
It wouldn't be a
Lizama.
Yes,
I
it
was going
wouldn't
to
be a
say,
great webinar if we weren't unmuting ourselves. So
yeah,
yes, by all means.
exactly. I have to follow protocol, but I did want to say like my pronouns are she, her, or
Thank you for
Palawan
sharing this.
in my native Chamorro language. So, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We're so excited that you're here. And please repeat again, what is the pronouns in your native language?
It's called Palawan, which is a reference to female or girl. So, Palawan.
Fantastic. And we are so excited you are here tonight. As I mentioned, you know, wow, what a mouthful of incredible experience creating these diverse spaces of equity and inclusion, these DEI spaces that you have been creating initiatives, supporting these programs. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to where you are today with all of that background and experience.
I think a lot of it is because, well, so first let me start off, when I was working as a staffer, professional staff with one of the members of Congress here in Washington, D.C., and we were a new office. And so, being native Chamorro from the Northern Mariana Islands, not many people knew about Pacific Islanders, even in general, right? And of course, there's not that many members of Congress who are of either Asian American, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander descent. And so a lot of it, while the portfolios I covered were, say, for example, it could be about, marine environment, it could be about transportation. But, when I'm talking to people about what transportation means or what economy means back in our islands, it wasn't enough. I had to be able to share and put a face to, well, what do Pacific Islanders in the Northern Marianas, who are they? How are they impacted if this law was not passed, right? And what does it mean? And so always having to explain that. So I, in that sense, my research extended to beyond just, well, here's what economic sustainability looks like to the islands, but what does it really mean to a person of indigenous descent? So I think that came part of that job. And then it followed through when I went to NOAA. And I swear I'm throwing like so many acronyms. And I feel like that fills up my whole it makes my resume look so glorious. If I just add all of those WIOMPI and NOAA and
Yeah.
and so,
Yeah.
even with NOAA, right? While my job is within congressional affairs, and I started out as a congressional affairs specialist, which really means I am the liaison between U.S. members of Congress, committees, their staff, and NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But, again, it just wasn't enough to be able to say, what does NOAA do? Because NOAA has work in the Pacific Island region, they do work internationally. And so having to explain to people, right? And a lot of folks within, even within NOAA, come to me, and I'm always grateful to help out, but trying to get a perspective of in an indigenous perspective, recommendation, how, what terms to use. And so while it wasn't done primarily on the portfolio, so it's an extension because it actually adds value, it adds color, which you can see me with my orange and my, and this bright.
I love this. Love
Yeah,
it.
so
Wow.
like it's
Yes.
adding color. And I think that's what, right, diversity and inclusion, equity, all of the amazing words, but it's really about adding color. So I think it naturally was an inherent part of all the work I was doing.
Yeah. And when you were doing some of that work, especially starting out, did you get a lot of pushback? Did you
I don't
experience that?
necessarily think it was pushback. I think when people don't understand or they don't know, right? It was really on me to make them feel comfortable to ask me questions and not feel
Mm,
awkward about it, or not feel little like, oh
yeah.
gosh, I have all these degrees, but I'm too embarrassed to ask this because it makes me look. And so part of that is, me being able to offer and say, oh, here's where I'm from, or here's what we do, or here's what this region focus on, or here's what these priorities are. But then bridging that and saying, here's how it's similar to your constituents, or here's how it's similar to the people that because I work for a federal agency, to the people that we serve, right? What does that look like? And so having that indigenous perspective, I don't represent all indigenous people. I can't speak for every tribal nation, and there's over 574 federally recognized tribes. And I'm not I'm not an enrolled citizen of a tribal nation. I am indigenous to one of the Pacific Islands. And while we share many similarities, there's also differences. And so for me to be able to bring that, and so I think that can help people. So again, probably not a pushback, but more of, well, what does this mean? It may mean something different to someone who's very specific to a program, or it can mean something to a member of Congress who says, okay, well, I'm not from that island, but what does that have to do? Well, you have so many people who are of indigenous descent or are Pacific Islands descent, and here's what it means to them. So, bridging those and making people feel more comfortable to come out and ask those questions or share their experiences too.
Right, absolutely. So create, again, going back to creating that safe space, not just for, those who are really needing it for the equity and inclusion, but also those who may not have a clear understanding, right? So and bridging that, that's phenomenal. We are
Yeah.
so happy that you're here, and then we're going to start our conversation a little bit tonight too. Thank you for introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your experience and where you work. So tonight's topic of conversation, we're opening the dialogue on the efforts of decolonization and restorative justice, within the tribal communities, and how NOAA has supported those efforts
Mhm.
through leadership and the council of the NOAA's Tribal Relations team, which is where you are. So, and that's the team that you're on. So with that in mind, for our audience who may not have a concise understanding of the historical context of our discussion today, could you explain how historical events like the Indian Removal Act, forced assimilation, land dispossession impacted the social and economic structures of the tribal communities today?
Yeah, so like that's with Indigenous Peoples Day, there's of course the idea, right? Because it stemmed from a federal holiday, which we all celebrated. We um, people on the federal law books, it is Columbus Day, and of course, a lot of Indigenous communities, many tribal nations came out and said, it's not about Columbus, it is about Indigenous people, right? And what had happened in the history. And while I won't speak for a lot of the tribal nations and their experiences and their ancestors' and spirit experiences and what they're going through now, but what I have heard, and just even as an Indigenous person who come from an island that was colonized by several different countries over a time, but at any time when you're taking people from their land, from their culture, from what they are, their beliefs, their system, and then you remove that. So, like someone, like say, if I was going to your house and I was like, you no longer belong here, and I don't like that your hair is curly or whatever that is, right?
Yeah,
So when you drastically change and you take that, not only is it like economically unstable or detrimental, but you have the cultural and the spiritual and then the family, that separation of family. So, a lot of that, the context of the Indigenous Peoples Day, and it's really not about a day because it's every day, it's not just one day, but it's every day that people are still trying to address and say, there's a lot of these things that happen in our past. There's a lot that need to be, we look at the Native Hawaiians and how they were, the monarchy was removed. So there's a lot in the history books, and I'm not here to like argue and say I'm the historian to tell you, but coming from a place where we had people say, well, we discovered the Northern Mariana Islands, but you can't really be a discovery if people were already inhabiting there. And then you come and say, well, we're now forcing you, and this is what I've heard from like my grandparents. Um, the force of the religion, because they felt that we were savages. And so they forced the religion on us. And then they forced us wearing clothes. Not that I'm saying that, wearing clothes or not wearing clothes, but, at different times, right?
yeah,
And so
yeah,
just and then wearing or speaking, even speaking the language, like I think that would probably be the most detrimental for many communities. And then those have impacts, those are domino impacts to your economy, to your social construct, to even as little as how you braid your hair or how hold, how do you wear, I'm wearing what we call amwer back home. And while these are not fresh flowers, they're weed flowers, but something to that effect. What does it mean? Why do I wear this? Right? And so there's always that some significance where you want to be able to bring that back. But maybe a long time ago, from what we hear from folks, many of our ancestors, many of our leaders, is what they were not allowed to do, what was taken from them. And so when you put that in, you apply that to yourself and say, God, if that happened to me now, if someone took my family away or someone took my home away or someone, was not giving me, took away the food that I grew up with or that I was raised with or that makes me feel, healthy. We talk about food sovereignty and whatnot. So I think all of those, maybe not by itself is detrimental, but if you look at all the how the impact and how traumatic it was. So this is really more about, sometimes it can be even individual, right? It may, you have a community, but how that actually affects an individual can also be beyond. So there's a lot of things to consider. And so as we talk about them, we learn more. I still learn more. I'm Indigenous, but I am not, like, again, I'm not the Indigenous whisperer. I will not know exactly how a community feels unless they shared it, what's important to them. And again, maybe what was important then, has been erased. So we don't see it today. And it could be, a long time ago where I was from, people used to eat sea turtles, right? Now we know there's federal law and there's local law that says we no longer eat sea turtles, and for whatever reasons. So things can change and it can be okay. And then there's other times when it's just not okay. When you take someone's land, it's just never okay because now they are just totally separated. So those are just all the different ways.
Yeah, and it's generational. It
Oh
compounds
yeah.
generationally. Yeah, to affect everybody and those impacts. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's a lot. It's
it's
heavy. Yeah.
it
It's
is
heavy.
very heavy. It's heavy because it's something that's internalized generation after generation, and things are forgotten. And we look to our elders, I think, too, to pass along that important information and the stories that come along with it, so that we don't forget. So thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. Um, how can um, how can government agencies address this economic disparities and promote sustainable development in the tribal communities while preserving both that culture and heritage
Hmm.
that we were just talking about?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say anything that's like earth shattering, and I hope it's not earth shattering for folks, but
Right.
but you know what? And really, I get this question a lot is, well, how can we, and then whatever that question is, with tribal and indigenous communities. And a lot of times I tell people it's just engage, engage, engage. You have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone and
Mm.
not be more proactive, right? So if you're overseeing a program, and ask yourself, are there native voices that are supporting whatever program? Are they involved? Are they getting, are they applying for the grants that we're offering? All these requests for proposals that we list out. And if we're not getting it, that shouldn't be the end of it. We should probably dig in a little more. So investing in the time to reach out, know your community. It's like what we do, know your audience, right? Know your community. So if are within a space that deals with 10 indigenous communities, make that effort to understand all 10. Whether it's just, I'd like to invite you to our office to learn more so that we can find out what's a priority, what's missing, or what can we do more of. And I feel that a lot of government employees, whether it's federal or local, right, is that sometimes we don't reach out, and it could be just time wise too, but we don't want to reach out unless we are, unless we have something to reach out to, whether it's a request for proposal or we either have good news or bad news, whatever that is. And I said, sometimes it doesn't have to be about a news. Sometimes it can be merely be, hi, my name is Becky. I'd love to invite you and talk to you more about what we do. And then let that spur the conversation, and have that open. We talked about earlier about how we want people to feel comfortable when we're talking, and not this, I come with an agenda and I want something from you, or I
Right.
want to give you. So I think it really is, if you want people to open up to you, I feel like you need to open up to people. And again, not earth shattering, right? But um
For
but
some, it
I
can
can't tell
be,
you. I
but
tell
I
you,
agree with you. Yeah,
I
it's
get
just
it a lot.
that connecting. Yeah,
It is. It really is a connection. And I think sometimes as uh when we do our work, we get so overwhelmed with everything. One thing I see and I hear a lot is that when communities, whether individuals, a government, a tribal government, an indigenous group reaches out, I hear a lot, Becky, I haven't heard back from this group. I haven't heard
yeah,
back from this agency. I haven't heard, and I think the best thing, even if you don't have the answer immediately, is acknowledge, they took the time to write to you or call, extend that same courtesy, acknowledge it, and say, I will look into it, or I will connect you with the right person, or let me think about this more, or let's have a follow-up conversation after I've done some research. But I hear it a lot. And then that already builds that distrust, and it
sure.
builds this, like, they don't have time for me, I don't have time for them. And then you start losing it, and those barriers and those walls are built up. So again, these can be sometimes just really simple things, and I know that, like, as employees, we just get overwhelmed with the requests. But if you prioritize that 10 emails that came in and respond to it, and then get back to it, and try to figure out, I really think that relationship building is going to go a long way.
Yeah, I can totally concur. I think, again, being in this space, being in, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and equity space, if we're going to build the equity, we first need to build the bridges, and bridge the gap, right? And that starts with connecting to individuals, having these kinds of dialogues, right, with the audience tonight. Having these sorts of opportunities to listen, to learn, to connect with individuals, I think is really key for building that equity. I don't I guess there's other ways around it, but that's really like your first building block, I think, for creating that space and supporting that space. And you know it's really interesting that the government agencies here, right? So I know NOAA is doing a lot. NOAA does a lot with the government agency in terms of what they're doing for the tribal communities. And actually, can I rewind our conversation just a little bit? I would love for you to share what is the best way to address First Nations, tribal communities. What do you think is the best way to address these communities?
So you're talking about like from a NOAA perspective or just from, a person
Just
of indigenous
as a
descent?
first, yes, as a first person perspective, I think that I know that I've had people ask, what's the best way to address these communities as an individual?
Yeah. So, from at least for myself and then just others that who also think along the same line, I do like that personal outreach, right? Whatever that is. So I know that we tend to send email blasts, right? Or we figured, okay, if we put on a website, it's up to, folks to go look into it. But, and I'll give you an example. Uh, NOAA issued a request for proposals on a grant program. And, I remember this one consortium, which included several tribal nations. And they wrote to me saying, Becky, we would like this. And they explained what they were looking at. And then I connected them, and we found out that that wasn't what was a criteria under that grant program.
Hmm.
So then, fast forward, I think 2 months down the line, we have another similar grant program that we then put out requests for proposals. And then it hit me, and I remembered, I said, I remember this group reaching out saying that they were interested in this, but this is what their issue was. And so I had confirmed with the program and said, okay, I just want to confirm if this group, knowing that this is what they were concerned about, would this fall under, would this be eligible? And they said, yes, that would be eligible if this was met. So, instead of me thinking, oh, it's up to them to figure out whether or not this would work well, or work within their limits, I immediately wrote back and I followed up and I said, 2 months ago, you had wrote to me, you had asked me about this. And I just wanted to circle back that this new RFP, right, appears to meet what you're trying to do. And I recommend you reading it. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to connect you one on one. And so having that, that definite, I mean, I understand there's like 574 federally recognized tribes. And so for the life of me, I won't, but I do keep a table. I try to keep notes to myself. And so it's putting that extra effort and investment into the communities that we serve.
Right.
People use a lot of NOAA products. And so, but it goes beyond too, just if it's tribal nations, those federally recognized. I look at state recognized, tribal nations. If they have reached out, I try to ensure that we are reaching out to them, because a lot of, at least for NOAA, a lot of our grant programs are open, nonprofit organizations. There are indigenous communities that are, are built or structured as nonprofit organizations. So, it's being mindful of these things and paying attention and trying to be as thoughtful as possible, just like we do in all our lives, right? We all have families. I'm a mother. I'm also a grandmother. I'm a wife. I've been with my husband for over 30 years, and so, I do things for my mom. I do things for my brother. I do things, I'm a sister. I'm an aunt. And so for each one, they have their own wants and needs and craziness sometimes, as all families do.
I can relate. I've got Caribbean heritage. Yes, yes.
We can all relate to that. So I think of it like that, right? So you're thinking about your families and your friends, and they're all going to have different things. And when I think of, oh, it's somebody's birthday, right? I'm just going to wish them a happy birthday. Well, in terms of my work, I'm thinking, oh, this was something that was a priority for this region, right? And so I'm trying to target it. So and it can be as simple too as when Noah does these rollouts, you
Yeah,
know, it's so easy to send emails to like five and but why do I want to send to, like, say for example, to the 229 tribal nations in Alaska if this particular rollout or this program has nothing to do with Alaska? Why would I fill up somebody's mailbox
right.
with nothing, right? So that part of being that meaningful and thinking how, how do I engage, how do I think about it, it's being considerate and respectful of their time, it's being considerate and respectful of the, the response or their priorities, taking the time to look at their websites and understanding who they are. And when you don't know, reach out and ask, right? And so I think doing all of those things and, being genuine when you're reaching out,
Yeah,
saying, I would
yeah.
like to know more about your, it's not because it's if my self interest, it's because I really want to have this program be successful, and including your voice is going to add to that. So I think in those situations, so I think those are like the different ways of reaching out and engaging.
Yeah, and NOAA has. I was just looking at a couple of the grants that have come out. The coastal habit restoration and resilience grants. NOAA has made 1.5 million available for tribes for regional ocean partnerships. I mean, NOAA has really stepped it up in terms of trying to create more equity for tribal nations. Yes, that's what it sounds like. Could you expand a little bit more on that?
Boy, Noah better give me a raise.
I'm high-fiving you, yeah. Yes,
No,
exactly.
no, okay. Well, in all
Good.
seriousness, I mean, yes, like so a lot of times, right? It's going to always depend on, again, we work in partnership with so many communities,
Yeah,
whether or not they're tribal nations, whether or not they're indigenous communities, let's just say communities in general, right? Because
yeah,
the products that we put out is meant to serve the public. It's meant to serve you, the counties, the state governments. And we do outreach to all the state governments, and so, this is really knowing your constituents, right? And so, a lot of the products that NOAA does put out, and they have, I would say that in these last several years, and I am not going to take credit for all of this because I only came into this particular space
yeah.
as a senior tribal liaison just last year. But just looking, right, and just all the time that I have been with NOAA and just even working in other spaces, there's going to be kind of like this up and down, right? Because it's going to always depend. Right now, NOAA is done a great job in terms of taking the funding that, the US taxpayers through Congress has provided in the infrastructure law, in the Inflation Reduction Act, and many other programs that are supported by taxpayers, right? Saying that these are priorities. And so working with those partners, bringing that to light. So yeah, NOAA has done, been able to say, okay, we've had these consultations with tribal nations, and this is what they said is important to them. And we've tried to go beyond that. But it's not to say that NOAA hasn't also been slapped on the hand saying, you know what, you guys got to do better. And I always feel that, for every time that we do move forward, we always got to step back and think to ourselves, what could we have done better, right?
Of course.
Could we have included more people? And that goes back to, could there have been a diverse, we get that a lot. And as you know, as many of you all know, sometimes we're just limited just by the budget. If we get $100, giving $1 to every tribal nation is not going to go far. But if we're able to take and say, okay, well, maybe two of them can get $50, and that can move them farther, and we're just going to have to keep moving the needle. So a lot of calculus. Don't scream at me, math folks. But the calculus goes into thinking about what's going to go best with such limited resources. And so I think sometimes, NOAA will get And I'm going to be, we'll probably get yelled at, right? Because we're not doing enough. And then sometimes we are cheered at when we are trying to do, and we put out as much, but it really does take this whole like village of folks, because it's not just NOAA can't get its money on its own. Like, we're working with Congress, and we're working with the state legislature, and working with the counties, other government agencies. And so bringing everybody, saying, okay, well, what's important? So, those, though, it's definitely not just a NOAA thing. It is a community wide, across a whole of government. I know we use that term a lot, but I've seen it so many times. And so, whole of
It's
federal
years.
government, state government, local government,
Yes, I mean
tribal
we're all
government.
gears. Yeah, and we're all gears working together to for the
Yeah.
betterment of society, and in particular these communities that we're discussing, right? Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, I have sometimes like said to Noah, okay, you guys got to step it up, pick it up, move, 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 move.
Yes, there needs to. I mean, it's like a cheering squad. There needs to be those cheering squads to
Yeah,
represent
yeah.
and these communities. I mean, it's really important, and that's you, right?
Well, I am one.
Let's take all the credit. No, just share,
I'll take
just
a little
share,
bit, just a little bit.
just share the credit. Yeah, just a little bit. We share it. We share it. So,
We share it.
one of the things that's a high topic of discussion, obviously within the tribal communities too, is the effects of the environmental justice aspect, right? And so, can you share the environmental justice issues that the tribal communities have historically faced? And are these issues still impacting the communities today?
So because there's so many tribal nations, I mean, just alone, there are 574 federally recognized. And of course, that number can go up, right? Because either they can
Can
get
you repeat that number again, please?
574 federally recognized tribes.
Across the
And
country.
yeah,
Wow.
so like across the United States, right? And but that number can go up, right? Because there are many more tribal nations who are applying for federal recognition, right? So when you just think about that, and you're not even thinking about all the other, um that, like, the state recognized, or even those that haven't even been recognized by the state or the federal government, but they're still coming together as a community, advocating for, whether it's their cultural rights, whether it's their natural resources rights. And so those impacts, along the way, from the past, a lot of things go through court. A lot of things are going through maybe some mediation, or are still being considered. And so when you think about, all of that, there is like really no one aspect to it, because everyone is so, again, you have some tribal nations where their treaty rights indicate, here is what we agreed to, right? It's a treaty between the United States government and the tribal nation. Here are the
Okay.
reserve rights. Other
Hmm.
times, people had to go to court to get them. Like we saw that in Washington, and some of the Pacific Northwest. They call it the Bolt decision, which is a Supreme Court case that said, there's co-management between those tribal nations, based on the treaty, and the state government. And so, even to this day, some of those, whether it's, those type of resources, whether it's economic resources, which, almost everything feeds into economy, your economy, right? And how you,
Right.
so that they're very intertwined. Because it could be, like people, like the people who made this, or my aunt who made this for me, like, part of her, it's a cultural thing, but she also sells it, to folks. So that's also generating for her, building her livelihood, but also expanding the cultural. So I think with all of that, it's this ongoing, and there is no one, like, oh, here's this one decision that applies to everybody. And so, like, the social justice and the environmental justice is going to vary between each, because we're going to have certain nations. And so again, NOAA, a lot of our primary, I would say, is like in the ocean, coastal, right? So those are
Right.
the ones that I'm probably dealing with. And the environmental justice concerns that we hear a lot is definitely surrounding fisheries, just because we manage fisheries, right?
Okay.
Is it fair on how you divide, or how you decide the timing, right, of when we can fish, when we cannot fish? I mean, it's just like, telling somebody who's always done it for so many years, and then to say, okay, well, now you only have 1 hour to fish out of this whole year. Well, how am I going to feed my family?
Yeah.
What subsistence? those are some of those issues that are still going through the courts on determining what rights they have, social justice, environmental justice. But really, it's a human. It's oh, but I don't know what happened. Can you see me now?
Yeah, yeah, I can
Oh,
see you.
okay.
I hear
I
you
don't
and I
know
see
why,
you.
but it just like shut down. But I assure you, it wasn't my light or anything. We just had this
It
conversation.
wasn't your light. You didn't have to do this. Yeah, I
You
see
can't
you.
see me. Okay. But so, a lot of that, so when we talk about environmental justice, all the concerns, because NOAA, we deal with the fisheries, um, we're dealing with, when there's hurricane, there's these disasters, right? So we have communities applying, how is that meted out? How is that distributed? And again, a lot of that's going to fall on, well, what resources are being provided to us so that we can provide to our. So what we do here a lot is that, tribal nations are not stakeholders, so they shouldn't be treated like the public. I hear that a lot all the time.
Can
They're
you
not
repeat that
your
again? They're not stakeholders, so
they're
they're
not
not treated. Okay,
stakeholders. So they shouldn't, they're not your like your local PTA groups.
right.
They're because they have their own governments, they have enforcement officers, they have a tribal court system. And so, at the entity where you have like state, you have a state governor, you have a state legislature, and all that's accorded to them and that sovereignty. Well, tribal nations are sovereign nations, so they shouldn't be accorded as being anyone that's off the street. So the comments that they provide, when they say that this is not, in parity to what we are getting as like other states. And so those are other concerns that I hear as well, is that we shouldn't be treated as any other person from the public, because there is this trust responsibility. But then if you also look at like indigenous communities, maybe some that have not been, they're not recognized as a federally recognized tribe, what are some of those environmental justice, right? So we look at, some communities that are underserved, right? And so, what is missing from there? And so we do, and, we look at NOAA's strategy, and priorities. We are trying to address underserved communities. And again, that could include tribal nations who are not getting the resources that they should be. It
Hmm.
could include other communities. And so those are things that NOAA is trying to look at, in beyond just, here's what we have and here's what we're going to distribute, but really take in and think, okay, in this specific region, what is most important, and then again, just falling back on NOAA's mission, right? We're looking at the environment, we're looking at, and which we work with other federal agencies. We're looking at Environmental Protection Agency, which is EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. So we all kind of like play that part. And so trying to bring those environmental justice, but again, it's really more of a human issue than it is, what impacts me can also impact my environment, can impact my family, culturally, spiritually. So there's a lot that, you may not be able to quantify in terms of dollars, but it does impact folks. And those are still just being, those are some of the things that I hear a lot. And then just also just from my own personal experience. That's a lot.
Um,
Yeah.
it is. It is. And I'm wondering, have you heard anything recently? I mean, Milton just came on the heels of Helene in Florida. Have you guys been hearing some needs and wants, and support from tribal communities down there because of that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, like in Florida, there are two federally recognized tribal nations. But then again, there's a lot of communities, right? Underserved communities.
Right.
And so we do hear from them. Now, I don't think they're coming to NOAA directly for assistance. Normally, that goes through FEMA. So I imagine
Hmm.
FEMA, oh boy, what a time to be working for
Yeah,
FEMA.
that's true.
FEMA, I give you kudos
Yes,
because
kudos
I
to
can
Steve.
imagine. So I feel like NOAA is kind of we're that in the forefront. So we're
Hmm.
making certain that people are getting the weather, notifications,
Right.
updating communities, so that community leaders can decide when should you notify your constituents to evacuate, right? What to take with them, what's open, ensuring there's no price gouging, Lord,
Yes.
no, none of that, and the fraud and whatnot. But right
Hmm.
now, so I don't think they're coming to know, because NOAA has already, we've sent out our hurricane hunters to track, right, the hurricanes, and then give all the information to your community leaders, to your legislature, to your members of Congress. In so and having that information, right. And so I think what we our hearing in general, because we also look at our employees, right? So there's two sets, right? We have the public that we serve, but we also have to take care of our employees, because if our employees are not taken care of, well, then how are they going to do the work? And they're impacted. So it's double for them, that they're still trying to provide the information to the community that's impacted, but they themselves. So I do like that NOAA has been providing, and I'll give you one example because I just read it very recent, was saying that, because of the impacts, whether they don't have power, food, whatever that is, they're allowed to ask for advance pay, to get the money so that they can buy the necessities, or be able to, get in a hotel if, their home was destroyed. The other thing is that no employees are able to donate annual leave. So in case these families, and maybe my colleague doesn't have enough annual leave to take off to take care of their family. So this allows us, and it's an emergency situation, but allows us to donate our annual leave to give to these families so that they're not impacted. Who wants to go without a paycheck? I mean, I live paycheck to paycheck. I don't know about many of you. So, it is important that I'm able to buy food
Yep.
or the
Yep.
clothes because it was destroyed. I don't have, maybe my car's been destroyed, so I have to go rent something. And and those businesses, right? We want to be able to ensure that those businesses, because they just can't give it out for free too.
Yep.
So I've
Absolutely.
seen that in NOAA. So having to hear from employees and ensuring that we stepped up and didn't have to wait for them to say, hey, this is how I'm impacted. Given that NOAA's history, 50 years, and has been doing this work, we should know how people are impacted and what does that mean for employees. So I do like that we're able to help in these many ways. But we don't, not like FEMA, we don't give out those emergency grants. I mean, I
Right.
wish we could, if there was more. We do for fishery disasters, but that is more of a long term thing than it is like
Okay.
the short term. We need food, the basics. So again, kudos to FEMA and all the other local emergency and leadership who are trying to get these basic necessities to people in need.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's kudos, absolutely. I can echo your statement. Kudos to FEMA for helping out these communities down there that really need it. And I love that NOAA. So my experience with NOAA too is like, I think back in the day you could call the weather and NOAA was supplying that information a long time ago. But I mean, I feel like NOAA has really developed and really expanded all of their programs. And I was just amazed about what they were doing and working with the tribal communities, and the fact that they have a tribal liaison, a team, and so forth. It's really incredible work. But I kind of want to rewind a little bit to cultural preservation and revitalization, and how tribal communities are working to preserve and revitalize their cultural practices, languages, and the traditions in the face of cultural appropriation and erasure. And I want you to tell me a little bit about what you're wearing and where it's from, and a little bit of the history. You said your auntie made it for you too.
Yes. And so I left to go, gosh, I think it was to go work on the hill. Or maybe even when I went to go to law school. So it was like way back. So I'm dating myself. It was way, way back many
We
years.
can date
And
ourselves.
so
It's okay.
yeah, we can date ourselves. We can definitely date ourselves. So she had woven this for me as a going away gift, and I told you that she also sells, so there's a lot of tourists who also want to buy. And that's the nice thing about it. You go to wherever place you visit, and you always want to buy local because you want to support the local community, right? You want to support that indigenous community and whatnot. And so like this one, and I'm sure like you've probably seen in a lot of like the native Hawaiian communities. So a lot of people are mistaken and think I'm native Hawaiian. I am a Pacific Islander, but just not from Hawaii. So those beautiful Hawaiians, native Hawaiians. But it's something similar. So, you put flowers and you make it into a head, like a head lay, right? And so this one, in even to this day, but for so many generations, having someone make a head lay or even lei, or just anything with flowers, was a definite, like, an appreciation for you. It was celebrating, it was honoring you for whatever achievement. And at that time, I believe I was going to law school, although a lot of people were like, why are you going to law school, why do you want to be a lawyer? So I'm not sure. I believe that this one was definitely celebrating me as opposed to chiding me as to going to law school. They're like, why would you take a perfectly good engineer and make her into an attorney? I'm like, no, I don't want to hear it.
Look, that's right. That's right.
But I see a lot in, you talk about, how are whether it's tribal nations or other indigenous communities all across the US, right? How are they preserving that? Um, what I would say in the experience of NOAA, just what I've seen, so a lot of the grant programs, right, that we are, sharing at the with the appreciation, right, of the U.S. taxpayers who really, are supplying Congress, then appropriates that funding. But taking that, what we've done is said, okay, we have these programs, and a lot of times we put set asides, or these, even if they're not set asides, but they are meant to address underserved communities, tribal and underserved communities, right? And ensuring that they are able to step up and to bring that. But what I have seen is that whatever project that they are proposing, they weave in what that means culturally, how they're preserving their culture. And that is definitely that one way of, we're meeting the environmental issues that's facing that community, but at the same time, they're using their knowledge, indigenous knowledge, right? Of, well, this is the way we would like to do this program, and how we can ensure that the ways that we've been doing it continues with our next 7 generations, right? And so a lot of the education is being woven into it, a lot of the practices, traditional practices, the use of herbs, use of how, the fish that we catch for subsistence, or the fish that we catch for commercial, right, for our livelihood. It can just, it can be simply wild rice in the Great Lakes is very important to a lot of tribal nations, right? It could be the way that you're, again, because NOAA deals with, coastal, oceanic, more of that in those portfolios, but how that is taken into, and how that can, it really adds that, I'm going to go color, that
Mhm,
value, and then
mhm.
just the respect for how they're trying to ensure that their way of life continues and is not erased. I know you use that word erasure, but
Yeah.
that's the way. It could also be, sometimes I've seen it in a lot of many other cultures, is that, like, for example, NOAA, we have been working with tribal nations, certain tribal nations, on cloud charts, and it is in their language. They then translate it in their language, and so getting part of that helps their community, right? There's a lot of communities that are drought stricken. Again,
Okay.
as they take in that information and they talk about drought, and the plans that they're going to use, or they're going to implement, but implementing it in the resources that they have, that they're used to using, and that has a very cultural significance. And so I see those are the different ways that they are somehow incorporating or including within their culture, and ensuring that that thrives.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah. You have to. You have to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you start to lose these little pieces bit by bit, and if you don't continue the stories and the significance of certain things, you're gonna start to lose that. And it's great to hear that you and the team and your team there at NOAA is working towards supporting that. It's phenomenal work. It's phenomenal work.
Yeah.
Um, I can't believe that we we are coming to a close this evening. I thought we had
Wow.
a full half hour left. I've fully enjoyed chatting with you, Becky. But before we go, there's a couple of things that I want to make sure that we recap here. Is um, what we've discussed this evening was talking about what you do at NOAA, right? And the specific elements that help bridge that gap. And it's what we're doing here, right? We are chatting, we're having a dialogue, we are connecting, even though You're all the way in Virginia, and I'm here in Maryland. We are still connecting. And of course, to the audience, we chatted a little bit before our evening's chat and webinar, and Becky and I really got a chance to connect. I hope, Becky, that we can grab some lunch or a coffee at some point in the future to discuss this more. But I would love for you to, what are some steps? I mean, I know we've talked about this evening, but what are some steps that individuals, organizations, policymakers, right, can do to support decolonization and social justice efforts within the tribal communities? What little tidbits, and I know we talked about bridging that gap and discussing and talking to people and just opening up, but what are some other efforts that you can suggest?
I have this thing about reading the news. So I go to like the Native News Online, Native Nation. I subscribe to certain tribal nations newsletter. And so I do take time to read those, and I actually compile a list of news that I think that may be of interest for our NOAA workforce that they can access internally. And so if someone wanted to have like just 5 minutes of downtime and read something of substance, and it can be anything, you can Google it, but I just think having that time to yourself to just like read something, learn something that you didn't even know. Yeah, again, there's a lot of information out there. And so just taking that time, again, 5 minutes of my day in the morning, I start off with, okay, well, what is something that I'm going to learn today? And I'll see like several news pop up, and I'll probably read like 4 or 5, because again, these are written for like 2-minute reads.
Right.
And so that is how I'm learning, and I'm thinking, okay, wow, this community. And again, it doesn't have to be very NOAA specific. I sometimes read about what other federal agencies are doing. I was like, you know what? I want to do that. Like, or
Right.
you know what? I
Why
don't
aren't we
want to do
doing
what
it?
they're doing.
Oh, Lord,
I
that
don't want to
too.
do. Yeah,
That's
I
the
do
other
the
side
opposite.
of
Like, I
it.
don't want to do what they're doing. They just got yelled at by Congress and tribal nations, so
You're like,
I'm
I'm
going to
just not
learn
going to
from
do
that.
that. Quick mental note to self.
So I do. I look at some of those things that pop up, and I was like, okay, let me read several of them, and then I try to share it with my. And at least that gets me, one, you're using your mind, you're learning something new, and then just really part that meaningful engagement of like, well, how do I make this better? How I can't always think that, okay, wow, NOAA is just amazing. Okay, tell them I said that they're amazing, but you just gotta always
Kind of
think,
better.
what
Yep.
can we do better, right, for our people, for our community. So that's I read.
I think that's great. And something that we also discussed prior to jumping into this webinar is, I shared with Becky that I am not, a subject matter expert in any sort of way with this material. And as much as it is for you, it's also a learning experience for myself as well. And I love that you, the subject matter expert here in this conversation, is also continually learning. And this is why we do this work. It's a constant space for learning. It's never ends. We are always evolving. We are always growing. And sometimes there's challenges in the way, and we have to pivot and weave. But also it's maybe us. We need to change, and we need to shift a little bit and understand the other side of the story. So
Yeah.
I do want to provide some space for if there are any questions from the audience for Becky or myself. You're more than happy to answer any questions that the audience would like to share. I think at this point, we do not have any questions, but I'm excited that we are going to have lunch at some point again, and we'll
Yes.
report back. I'll report back about how that lunch was to everybody here this evening. We are really excited that you are here with us, Becky. I do hope that we cross paths again on a more professional level, as well as just having fun. But I know that the Office of Human Rights and Equity would love to partner with you and some events and various opportunities and programs, initiatives in the near future. And just want to check to make sure we have, I guess there's no more questions for this evening. So, but Becky Cruz Lisama, am I saying that correctly?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
I love it.
I really appreciate you being with us here tonight at the Office of Human Rights and Equity at Howard County Government. You have been a fabulous interviewee, and I'm really and friend, colleague, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for having me, and have a great evening.